We are very blessed this morning with a very special guest here in the parish. She's going to speak to us a little bit right after Holy Communion. I just want to introduce Sister Gloriosa Komba. Is a Benedictine sister from the country of Tanzania in East Africa, and has been with us at all the masses throughout the weekend. And just what a great blessing it is, sister, to have you here. And welcome to Stillwater. Welcome to Oklahoma. Her first trip to Oklahoma. When I was a kid, I'm a child, for better or worse, a child of the 1980s. For those of you who weren't around in the 80s, it was okay. It was pretty good. There were good things about it. There were bad things about it. But it was a time of kind of culturally, especially in the United States, where it seemed like decadence was a thing. So there was like this movie, like Wall Street, and it was all about making money, and that should be what your life is all about. And then there was this show that sort of, as a third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader, kind of captivated my attention. And the show was called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And it had this kind of obnoxious host, and he was just all about showing people these big, beautiful houses, and houses with 2 swimming pools, and people who had their own private golf course, and their own private jets, and all kinds of stuff. So as a little kid, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, that looks awesome. That house is way bigger than mine. They have 20 cars. My family only has 2. So you kind of get into this mindset watching that show enough, as I did, where I thought to myself, well, that ought to be my goal. If I'm going to be sort of successful in life, then my house ought to look like that house. I ought to have more cars than I need. I ought to have my own private golf course. So I kind of went through this phase of kind of being sort of obsessed with that becoming what my life would look like. Well, so that sort of coincided, interestingly, I was in 5th grade, with Career Week. So I'm at school, and each day they bring in different speakers from different careers. They bring in a doctor and an attorney and a teacher, and I remember we had an Air Force pilot. It was kind of all these kind of interesting professions. So the person would give a little presentation and show some pictures, and then they would open it up to a question and answer. So my classmates would say, like, how long do you have to be in school to be a doctor? Or do you like being a doctor? Is it gross? They ask all these questions. Well, I had kind of money on my mind, so I raised my hand the first day, and I said, how much money do you make? So the teacher sort of let that pass. So the next day, we had another speaker. All the questions get asked. I raised my hand, and I said, how much money do you make? So my teacher kind of pulled me aside and said, that's not really appropriate. You're not supposed to ask people how much money they make. And I was like, why? It's Career Week. I really want to know how much money people make. So the next day, I still wanted to know. And so despite my teacher's sort of gentle pulling me aside, the next day I raised my hand. I asked them how much money they make. So my teacher kind of really pulled me aside and said, okay, don't ask that. So the next day, when it was all over, I just asked them privately how much money they made. Well, I kind of went through this little phase of being kind of obsessed with material goods. If I'm going to be successful, then I have to make a lot of money. Well, as we mature, and especially as we mature in the gospel, as we learn, as we fall deeply in love with Jesus Christ and his church, as we learn about what that kind of relationship looks like, what you come to realize, hopefully, is that having money can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing, too. Having the material goods that we need, providing for your family, having a good job, all of those things are good. But ultimately, we hear it all the time, money doesn't buy happiness. In a lot of cases, it causes unhappiness. And I tell you all that in light of 2 of the readings that we just heard. One from St. Paul to the Colossians, where he basically says, if you want to be rich, then center your life on Christ. If you want to be rich, then fall deeply, madly in love with Jesus Christ and allow him to love you. If you want to see some of the happiest people in some ways, oftentimes it's not people who have great material goods. I've had the great joy of spending a lot of time with Sister Gloriosa over the course of the weekend. She's one of the happiest people I've ever met. She took a vow of poverty to become a Benedictine sister. Back in Tanzania, her community has 500 sisters like her who have dedicated their lives to Christ. Now, do they have bad days? Sure, right? Yeah. But is it a happy community serving the Lord, not with material goods, but just with the work of their hand? And so it doesn't come down to ultimately what we have in order to achieve that goal of happiness. And then we hear from Mary and Martha. Just as an aside, I'll say Martha oftentimes gets the bad rap here. Many of you out there are much more Martha-like than Mary-like. This isn't meant to condemn you. And I'll simply say this, Martha is a saint. It's not like Mary is this great saint and then Martha is nothing. She's Saint Martha. Serving the Lord is a very good thing. But we're told that Mary chose the better part. And I would simply say, in this case, that Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. In this case, Mary put Jesus front and center in her life. She sat at his feet to listen to him, to be in his presence, to be filled up with the strength that only the Lord can give. And in that, Mary was rich. And so wherever we are in life, wherever you are in life, every one of us, ultimately, we want to be happy. Parents say that so often about their kids. I just want my kids to grow up and to be happy. I just want to be happy. Well, in what do we find happiness? So often, we try to grasp for that happiness in material goods. But looking at the example of Mary, looking at the example of St. Paul, where do we find richness? Where do we ultimately find fulfillment and happiness? We find it in Jesus Christ. We find it in a deep and personal relationship with him. We find it in receiving the sacraments as often as we can, being strengthened by the Lord to get through the difficult times of life, and they are many. Money will help us a little bit, but ultimately we cannot find our fulfillment there. If you want to be rich, if you want to have all that you need, we come to the fountain of, not of money, but of richness, of a deep and lasting friendship, of deep and lasting fulfillment of all of our desires. If we truly want to be rich, we go to Jesus Christ, the divine physician, the one who created us, the one who sustains us, and ultimately the one who will bring about our happiness on this earth and in the life to come.